Good morning, I'm Cesar Iliano, Content Director at BNamericas. Our 2023 Electric Power Outlook report is published, and in this video, our content team will be giving their views on what to expect from the industry in the next 12 months. As you know, Latin America economy is expected to grow 1.4% next year, compared to an estimated 3.2% for this year. This macro environment finds the Latin America electric power industry in the middle of a fast transition into renewable sources. This process is expected to continue next year, partly due to their increasingly competitive costs, the commitment of companies and governments to move forward towards a carbon neutrality, and the growing need to continue adapting the power structures in almost all countries in the region. In addition to the macroeconomic environment, several countries in the region are undergoing important political changes, with new leftist governments in Chile, Colombia, and Brazil, introducing certain degrees of uncertainty among investors. In the next minutes, BNamericas Energy Content team will be giving their views on the market they cover. We will start now with Michael Place, our regional energy editor based in Medellin. Hello, Michael. Good morning. You basically cover Colombia, and there Petro has promised to speed up the development of renewable energy sources and projects. How do you see this? How fast is this process advancing?
Yeah, exactly. The new president, Gustavo Petro, has promised to accelerate the clean energy transition and phase Colombia away from oil and gas. But he's been big on promises and really, I guess, short on details to date. We haven't really heard from him about how he plans to increase renewable energy capacity, how Colombia will overcome the difficulty with the transmission bottlenecks, especially in the country's north. There are many transmission projects that have encountered difficulties in terms of public consultations and the permitting. So we're not really sure if Colombia will be able to, fulfill its goal of bringing online more than 2 gigawatt of renewable capacity in the next 2 years. So not only that, but there are big concerns about Hidroituango, which of course is the big hydroelectric project in Colombia. It's the biggest infrastructure project in Colombia. It's supposed to generate 17% of Colombia's electricity. It was due online in 2018. It still hasn't come online. The first 2 turbines are actually due to start generating electricity this month. The owner, EPM, has said that that is unlikely to happen. EPM has asked for more time from the regulator, and the regulator is now appraising that request. But the problem with that is EPM also has contracts to begin generating electricity. If it doesn't fulfill those contracts, then there will be hefty fines in place. So a lot of uncertainty in Colombia's energy sector at the moment, especially regarding Hidroituango, regarding renewables, regarding transmission bottlenecks. But the plan from the Petro government is to step up renewable energy, and it needs to do so if it's going to wean itself off oil and gas, which of course is the flagship promise of the Petro administration.
Okay, that's interesting. Thanks, Mike. Let's now go over to Brazil with Joao Montenegro. He's our energy correspondent for Brazil. Good morning, Joao.
Good morning.
So, Lula's government is expected to be cleaner in many ways in all the sectors, and many see the clean energy projects that we've seen a lot of investment in the past years running even faster with the new government. What should we expect for next year?
Yes, Cesar, before getting to the change in the government issue, it's important to give you some context about what's going on in Brazil. The country is experiencing an inevitable change towards the decentralization of its electric power system. And this is, of course, primarily due to the expansion of its renewable energy generation capacity, which is concentrated in the northeast region of the country. So this growing potency will require a significant addition of power transmission infrastructure in order to be flowed to the southeast region, where Rio de Janeiro and São Paulo are located, and it's Brazil's main load center. Not incidentally, the transmission auctions that are scheduled to be held by the local watchdog ANEEL in 23 are expected to demand a record investment of approximately 50 billion reais, or $9.5 billion, which is the same amount contracted between 2018 and 2022. Another reason for this decentralization of the national grid is the growth of distributed generation units, which reached 15 gigawatts so far in 22, a capacity that is higher than the Itaipu binational hydro plant. It's likely that the DG expansion will slow down a little bit after January 23, when new projects will no longer be exempted from power distribution and transmission fees. But even so, additional growth is expected, considering the potential savings and ESG commitments. Let's recall that most of distributed generation in Brazil is based on solar power. The growth of distributed generation, combined with the expansion of the free, non-regulated power market, has led the local power distributors to a state of overcontracting. So consequently, the latest regulated generation tenders have resulted in relatively low volumes hired. Such a situation is expected to remain in the coming years as more consumers become eligible to enter the free contracting environment. Today, consumers with a load equal to or greater than 1,000 kilowatts served at any voltage can opt to purchase electricity from any supplier. But local authorities are studying the possibility of lowering the minimum limit to 500 kilowatts beginning in 23. At least one tender for the contracting of thermal plants is probably taking place next year in accordance with the Eletrobras privatization law, which determined that contracting of 8 gigawatts of gas-fired projects by 2030. The same law foresees the hiring of 2 gigawatts of small hydro plants by 26. So regulated tenders in 23 will be contemplating this source as well. So looking at Brazil's main players, Eletrobras will move forward with the sale of affiliated companies and special purpose entities, and will invest in the revitalization of key hydrographic basins, such as the São Francisco River Basin. This is a commitment that was also established in its privatization process. As a private corporation, the power holding will be able to sell electricity based on market prices in the free market. This, together with the recovery of Brazil's hydroelectric reservoirs, should maintain the short-term prices close to the floor at least until March or April of 23, when the dry period begins. Other highlights include companies such as Energias de Portugal, EDP, and Engie, which have large generation and transmission project pipelines, as well as Casa dos Ventos and French oil major Total Energies, which recently formed a joint venture focused on renewable power and green hydrogen. Total Energies and several other multinational companies have submitted offshore wind projects to the IBAMA Federal Environmental Agency, but a regulatory frame will have to be approved for them to come out of the drawer. A first licensing round for the granting of offshore areas for power generation may be held next year. Renewable power and green hydrogen are topics that are likely to be part of the agenda of the next federal government, as President-elect Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva will work to reposition Brazil as a global leader in the fight against climate change. This may also involve the federal oil giant Petrobras with a diversification of its portfolio, including renewable energy, green hydrogen, and more biofuel projects. So these are the highlights from Brazil, Cesar.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. That was very complete. Let's go north now to Mexico. Cristobal Riego is our energy correspondent for Mexico. As you know, as we all know, Mexico is on a different path regarding electric power sector. Cristobal has been explaining to our subscribers how AMLO is driving this industry. Should we expect any change next year, Cristobal?
Hey, Cesar. So essentially, no, we don't expect any major change, but there have been some changes on the margins, which I'm going to explain. Essentially, the situation Mexico is now is that the government is squarely focused on power generation, as it wants this sector to be controlled by CFE. And so everything in the government agenda involves expanding CFE capacity, expanding its control over all areas of the sector, clamping down on any mechanism that allows private generators to skip CFE's network, to skip any kind of mediation by the state company. And that has been going on for the past 2 years very strongly, and it's continuing. For example, this year we have seen a strong clamping down on self-supply. Many players are moving away from self-supply and signing contracts with CFE. And the other area where we are seeing a stronger control is in renewables. We had seen like a gradual closing of opportunities in this sector, but this year it has been a very important year because many players are starting to give up with the possibility of developing their especially their solar plants, but also their wind farms. And if you look at the BNamericas database where we track these individual projects, we are hearing from many developers that they are officially labeling their projects as suspended because they are having trouble securing permits in all stages of development. So it can be an environmental permit in early works. It can be an interconnection permit when the plant is ready to go, and there are developers who are having issues even starting up their power plants which are already built. And it can be construction permits, land permits, all kinds in all stages. So this is the current climate in terms of renewables and in terms of the energy transition. There are some projects that are able to move forward. CRE, the regulator, is extending some generation permits to smaller projects and stuff like that. But overall, the sector is halting or grinding to a halt. And what we hear from many developers is that they are waiting until a change of administration in 2024. So the projects are still there. They are still conducting studies. They are still holding the land to see if next administration maybe eases up on the controls a little bit and allows them to move forward. Now, that remains the same. But where there is some change is in the discourse of both CFE and the government. As I'm sure you know, Mexico is right now involved in a consultation with the United States and Canada over the USMCA trade treaty. And there, the United States, with Canada, which also joined in the protest, is saying that Mexico is violating the treaty in several areas, but especially in this area of renewables and private energy production in Mexico. And so the United States and Canada can at any moment, since October the 3rd, turn this into an international arbitration, ask for a panel, and then we could see a resolution coming in about a year. But for now, it's in open consultation, which means essentially a negotiation, which both parties can agree to certain conditions and end the pre-arbitration, essentially. And so this has led the authorities to change their discourse toward renewables. For example, we have seen recently, now in the COP27, Foreign Minister Marcelo Ebrard saying that Mexico will up its commitments for the energy transition, will increase its renewable capacity. And the same we have seen with CFE. CFE has now been saying, even though its near-term commitments involve exclusively natural gas production, so they are building around 7 gigawatts of new capacity, it is now playing up its other commitments, for example, with hydroelectric power, with geothermal power, and is now even saying they will build 5 new solar plants and 1 new wind farm, which goes against the grain of everything the administration has said about renewables, that they are intermittent, that they jeopardize the grid. But CFE is saying they will do it with battery storage so they can mitigate these issues. The fact that they are upping their renewable commitments, they are now saying they will add 30 gigawatts by 2030, is interesting, but we remain skeptical that whether they can make it if they don't adjust their policies, because CFE by itself, especially with all these other investment commitments, probably can't get there. So it will be interesting to see whether some of these words that are now circulating and these discourses that are changing manifest in some kind of concrete policy or not. So that's what we'll be monitoring in the coming months. And back to you, Cesar.
Great, thanks, Cristobal. Let's go now to the Andean region, the Caribbean, and Central America. David Casalas is BNamericas energy correspondent for those areas. David, good morning. What are the main trends you're seeing going into 2023?
Hi, Cesar. Well, 2023 could very well be a watershed year for non-conventional renewable energy in the Andean region. Bolivia plans to add a little over 500 megawatts from wind, solar, geothermal, as well as hydro to the national grid in the coming years. And authorities have pinned hopes that these energy sources will gradually replace natural gas-fired power generation to free up the gas to help cover domestic supply, fulfill export pledges, and industrialize the hydrocarbon, all this amid falling gas production. And to this end, the government recently published a supreme decree to have industry migrate to the national grid versus using gas for self-generation. In terms of projects in Bolivia, we reported that a Chinese group has secured a contract to develop 2 wind farms, and a consortium of Icelandic firms have won consultancy work to further define the future of the Laguna Colorada geothermal plant. Over in Ecuador, and as part of President Lasso's public-private partnership push, 10 companies are now vying to secure contracts in the selection process for 500 megawatts of renewables, with estimated investment of nearly $900 million. It's also worth noting that under this public-private partnership umbrella, there are also plans in Ecuador for large-scale hydros, such as Cardenillo and Santiago, as well as the Nororiental or Northeast Transmission Project. And in Peru, a recent study released by Deloitte suggests that the country could reach a scenario where renewable generation accounts for 81% of the energy matrix by 2050, of which 35% would correspond to wind and solar. But such a shift will require investment of over $10 billion. And a major milestone is scheduled in 2023 with the startup of Peru's largest non-conventional renewable energy complex, the 296 megawatt Punta Lomitas wind farm. And just jumping over to the Caribbean real quick, we expect to see advancement with Guyana's gas to energy project, especially after a consortium was selected for the EPC contract to build the associated 300 megawatt combined cycle power plant, which will use gas from the country's flagship upstream acreage, the Starbrook Block. And Guyanese authorities have also lined up a number of tenders to diversify the mix with solar and the relaunch of procurement for the 165 megawatt Amalia Falls hydro project. And finally, elsewhere in the Caribbean, particularly small island states, as well as some Central American nations, we should see stepped up actions on the distributed generation and energy storage fronts, much of which is related to grid resiliency. And among other items we're tracking are Puerto Rico's planned renewable energy supply calls, as well as calls for renewable energy in the Dominican Republic and Jamaica, the startup in Nicaragua of Central America's third LNG to power plant, and Puerto Rico's ongoing process to procure over 3,700 megawatts of renewable energy and 1,500 megawatts of storage. Thanks, Cesar.
Thank you, David. Finally, we'll talk about the Southern Cone. Alan Brown is the bureau chief there. Alan, let's take a look at Chile and Argentina. Mainly Chile, we have seen some headlines coming out of Santiago that have worried some investors. Should they be worried about what's going on here in Santiago?
Hi, Cesar. Yeah, you're right. Like earlier this year, well, quite recently, there was reports of 2 generators experiencing financial stress in the short-term market, paying for power bought on the short-term market. It's something that the authorities have jumped on very quickly. There's a public-private working group that's been formed by the National Energy Commission, SEN, to address this issue, to look to diagnose the problem, to look at the problem in depth, and to come up with potential solutions. Given the context, like Chile's, obviously the renewable energy is a huge source of investment for the country. It's going to play a key role in decarbonization. It's going to play a key role in green hydrogen and the derivatives. So there's going to be a lot of focus on this matter, and I think as well on grid planning. I think the silver lining of this, one reading, is that it's going to sharpen the focus on long-term planning of the grid and what power are we going to need in the future, and where, and how do we get this about around the country. So that's my reading of it. So it's being addressed basically.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Alan. Thank you very much for the team. I don't know, Alan, you have something else to add?
I'll just say Chile's. I've got a few statistics here, but basically, Chile has a big pipeline of project. There's about some of the latest stats. We're looking at 30 gigawatts with an environmental license. There's 17 gigawatts under evaluation. There's battery storage projects coming along. And one thing that's quite important to point out is that, as obviously the readers will know, the government has approved, Congress has approved the energy storage and electromobility bill, which I assume is going to open the doors for a lot of, I don't know how many, obviously, but it's going to open the doors for standalone battery storage projects. So for remuneration for those projects, for injecting into the grid. So that's something to watch, the impact of that bill, of that law, on energy storage. So there's a lot of projects under evaluation. Green hydrogen projects slowly coming along. A lot of obviously mentioned, with the bulk of all these are renewables. We've got the energy storage bill. We've got decarbonization, carbon neutral by 2050. So going back to the first question, Cesar, there's a lot of potential investment coming along the highway. So I believe that there will be a lot of energy and efforts put into grid planning to try and ensure that this doesn't become this like curtailment and the grid congestion, which was behind this problem, doesn't become a barrier or a hurdle to investment and put any therefore Chile's decarbonization goals.
Thank you very much, Alan, for your insights, and thank you to all the team. It's been a very complete view on what might happen next year on the electric power sector. I want to remind all BNamericas clients that our Outlook report is ready to read or download in our report section in our platform. In 2023, we will continue to cover the main trends and conversation topics with our experts on the ground, while adding hundreds of new projects to our database each month. So stay tuned. Have a nice day.